Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala
Waalaikumsalam.
asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in wa ba'd. Our topic for today is Bai'ul Ainah. Inshallah today we will cover two topics, Bai'ul Ainah and Tawarruq. So in Islamic finance, riba is haram and a transaction is halal based on Surah Al-Baqarah verse 275. A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim wa ahallallahu al-bai'a wa harrama riba. Allah has permitted trade and forbidden riba or usury. Now, what is bai'ul ainah? Ainah literally means salaf or contracting a loan. And sometimes it refers to purchasing on credit. That is ainah in terms of the literal meaning. Some people say it comes from the word ain, which means asset. Some other jurists opine that ainah is derived from the word i'ana or assistance. So we have four madhab, and in terms of the technical definition, there are many definitions of bai'ul ainah depending on the school of thoughts or madhab. So the definition of bai'ul ainah differs from one madhab to another madhab. The Hanafis focus more on the forms of ainah. According to Al-Haskafi, bai'ul ainah is the selling of something in deferred payment and taking profit from it, in which the party indebted will resell the same at a lower price in order to settle his debt. While Al-Zailai defined ainah as selling a thing in deferment and buying a thing back at a lower price. For example, Mukri sells a watch to me at let's say 120 ringgit, and the market price of watch is 100 ringgit. So Mukri sells the watch to me for 120 ringgit on deferred payment. So, and then I sell back to Mukri for 100 ringgit, and he pays me back in cash for 100 ringgit. So that is bai'ul ainah. Boleh Mukri? Boleh faham contoh tu? Cik Akmal, okay so far?
Okey. Dia jual pada harga yang murah lah doktor
Bukan, Mukri jual pada saya. Mukri jual pada saya. Harga jam tu RM100. Mukri jual pada saya RM120.
Okey.
On deferred payment, saya bayar bulan. Kemudian bila saya dapat jam tu, saya jual balik kepada Mukri dengan harga market price lah RM100. So Mukri bayar kat saya RM100, saya dapatlah cash RM100.
Okey.
And then saya bayar kat dia in deferred payment lah, RM120 tu. Jadi dia ada dua stage lah. stage pertama, mukri jual pada saya on a deferred payment dengan harga yang lebih mahal daripada harga market price. Okay. Second stage saya jual balik dengan harga cash pada harga market price lah. Okay. Amongst the Malikis, the famous definition of Ainah is the sale executed by a man who did not have what is asked from him. This means that a person or seller will buy the thing desired by his customer from a third party and sell it to the very customer at a higher price. To definition Maliki. In the Shafi'i school, Ar-Rafa'i in Fathul Aziz has defined bai'ul-inah as the act of selling a thing to another person in deferred payment, in which the thing is delivered to that person, to the buyer, and before the seller receives the payment for the sale, he buys it back in cash at a lower price. Macam kes jam tadi lah. The buyer sells the watch for 120 on deferred payment. Sorry. The seller sells the watch. The first person sells the watch for 120 in deferred payment to the second person, and the second person sells the watch back for cash for 100 ringgit. Imam Ash-Shafi'i defined bai'ul-inah to mean when a person buys a thing on deferred payment from another person and the delivery of that thing is received, then it is allowed for him to resell it to the initial seller or to another person, either at a lower or higher price or on deferment or against another commodity of whatever quality, and never is a second contract associated with the first. So according to Imam Shafi'i, it is permissible as long as the two contracts are not dependent on each other. The second contract has nothing to do with the first contract. Otherwise, it will not be permissible. So the second contract must not be dependent on the first contract. Ibn Qudamah from the Hanbali Madhab wrote in Al-Mughni, and whoever sells a thing on deferred payment, indeed, it is not worthy of him to purchase it back at a price lower than which he had earlier sold. This is called bai'ul-inah. So, in conclusion, bai'ul-inah is selling a thing on deferred payment at a higher price and buying the same on cash at a lower price. Al-Mawsu'ah Al-Fiqhiyah defined bai'ul-inah as a loan in the form of a sale in order to make the increase appears lawful or permissible. So the question is bai'ul-inah permissible or not permissible according to jurists? Jurists differ. Some says it is not permissible, and some jurists argue that it is permissible. First, let's look at the opposition of Ainah, those jurists who who argue that bai'ul inah is not permissible. The majority of jurists say that bai'ul inah is not permissible. According to fuqaha of the Malikis and Hanbalis, inah is void, void, batil, tak sah, and prohibited or haram. So inah is void, tak sah lah, dan haram. Because it is considered as sadud dari'ah, or avoidance of riba. Dia macam riba tapi nak mengelak riba. Dia macam hilah untuk mengelak apa dah riba.
Macam tidak lah.
Ya.
Tidak.
Ya, tidak. Dia macam kita kata nak mengelak riba, kita buat macam ni kan. Dia macam ada satu elemen riba juga di situ.
Trik.
Oh, trik lah. Macam trik untuk mengelak riba kan. Jadi ulama Hanafi ni dia kata dia tak membenarkan riba. Tapi ada juga sebahagian daripada ulama pada mazhab Hanafi yang membenarkan riba. Abu Yusuf permits riba on the basis of intention. That is, if inah is intended to avoid riba by the involving parties. Abu Yusuf kata, okey, inah ni okey sebab niat dia nak mengelakkan daripada riba. Muhammad Ibn Al-Hasan viewed inah as makruh. Ibn al-Humam clarified that Abu Yusuf permits inah on the condition that commodity will not go back to the initial seller. So if the commodity does not go back to the initial seller, it is okay. If it goes back to the initial seller, then it is not allowed. It is not permissible. But if the commodity does not go back to the same seller, it is called tawarruq. It is not bai'ul inah as we understand it. Kalau tawarruq, okay, dia ada 3 pihak. Pihak pertama jual kepada pihak kedua on a deferred payment at a higher price. Pihak kedua jual kepada pihak ketiga on cash at a market price, at a lower price. Yang tu dipanggil tawarruq. Okay, Muhammad bin Al-Hasan refer commodity which will be resold to the initial seller when granting the verdict of makruh. So Muhammad Al-Hasan is in the opinion that if the commodity is resold to the initial seller, then it is makruh. The jurists who are in this category have based their findings on several hadith. There is a hadith. Aliyah binti Aifa said, I came upon Aisha's place with Walad of Zaid ibn Arqam and his wife. Then Walad of Zaid ibn Arqam asked, I had sold a slave to Zaid ibn Arqam for 800 dirhams on deferred payment. Then I bought him back from Zaid for 600 dirhams cash. Aisha replied, very bad is what you sold and bought. Convey to Zaid that he had nullified his struggle with the Prophet, unless he repented. Walad of Zaid then said, O mother of believers, what if I just take my capital? Aisha responded by reciting a verse. Those who, after receiving the direction from their Lord, deceased shall be pardoned for the past. Their case is for Allah. So the proponents of Bai'ul-Inah use this hadith as evidence not to allow Bai'ul-Inah. In other words, Bai'ul-Inah is prohibited by those jurists based on this hadith. So to those who prohibit Ainah, the above hadith serves as an evidence against Ainah, because Ainah leads to riba, which may be seen from the strong detestation. Detestation means hate, from Aisha radiallahu anha. Another strong prohibition is clear from the hadith narrated by Sahaba Abdullah ibn Umar. When men become frugal with money, um, that is gold and silver coins, and trade on the basis of aina, and when they follow the tails of cows and live jihad in the path of Allah, Allah will send down a trial that He would not remove until they revert to their religion. So, based on this hadith, those jurists uh, give the verdict that Bai'ul-Inah is prohibited. Another hadith narrated by Al-Awza'i, which means narrated by Al-Awza'i from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said, there will come a time when riba is legalized through trade, which is al-aina. Other than that, there is also hadith wherein Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has prohibited two sales conducted under one contract, as narrated by Abu Hurairah. That means one who effects two sales in a single sale should take the lower of the two or riba. Nevertheless, there are jurists who uphold the concept of aina, and these are their justification. So there are some jurists who support Bai'ul-Aina, such as Imam Ash-Shafi'i, the majority of his disciples from Madhab Ash-Shafi'i, and the Zahiris. They have based their finding on, firstly, the basic ruling of permissibility of trade in Quran, wa ahallallahu al-bai'a wa harrama riba. Allah has permitted trade and forbidden riba. So Imam Ash-Shafi'i is of strong opinion that Bai'ul-Aina is permissible because it is a form of trade. With regards to the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, Imam Ash-Shafi'i asserts that the hadith is da'if due to the weak chain of narrators. The problem with the sanad, with the chain of narrators or sanad, particularly the one by the name of Aliyah bint Awfa. Imam Ash-Shafi'i is also of the opinion that What is prohibited by Aisha is the undetermined period of deferment or gharar. Imam Ash-Shafi'i also argues that even if the hadith is sahih or a strong hadith, the discrepancy or khilaf between Aisha and Zaid shows the presence of qiyas. So in the absence of clear prohibition by the nas or text, it is better or it is awla, or better to allow aina. That is the opinion of Imam Ash-Shafi'i. Ibn Hazm from the Zahiri school added that Zaid had performed his own ijtihad and would still be rewarded regardless. This is in line with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which means if a judge makes the right decision through ijtihad, he shall be doubly compensated. If he errs, he shall be compensated once. Coming to the hadith of Ibn Umar, it is argued that the hadith is not sahih for the isnad. One of the narrators, Ishaq ibn Usayd, is da'if or weak. The proof or didalah is also vague due to usage of the alphabet waw, huruf ataf. So is the position with the hadith by Al-Awza'i. So in conclusion, there are the majority of jurists prohibited aina, although Imam Ash-Shafi'i permits by all aina. So the issue of by all aina are highly disputable. There are differences of opinions regarding the permissibility and impermissibility of juries. Those who are in favor of Bai'ul Aina will provide, the reasoning. So those who oppose Aina also have their own justifications. Any questions so far? Ada soalan? Ada? Tak ada soalan? Okay.
No, sir. Thank you so much.
Oh, Ahmad, you are here. Oh, Alhamdulillah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any question
Yes, sir.
from you, Ahmad? Any question?
No, thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
The tarjih is the opinion of the Hanafi, Maliki, and Hanbali, right?
Yes.
Tarjih.
So the majority of the jurists, including Hanafi, Hanbali, and majority of jurists are in the opinion that Bai'ul Inah is permissible. Although Imam Ash-Shafi'i said
Zahiri.
Bai'ul Inah is not permissible. That's why in Malaysia we still, at one point in time, Bai'ul Inah was used in the application of certain product.
For example, Doctor,
Okay. Oh, for
for
example,
banks activities or other transactions.
okay, in how we apply to the bank, at one point in time, we use the concept of Bai'ul Aina. So, for example, letter of offer, asset sale agreement, and asset purchase agreement. So the mechanisms or the contract documentation process of buy online in Malaysia involves the letter of offer, asset sale agreement, and asset purchase agreement. So if you read the Sharia standard issued by SAC, Sharia Advisory Council, so buy online must include these three documentation. Must have letter of offer, asset sale agreement, and asset purchase agreement. So the asset in the contract must be certain and of real entity. Usually, the bank in Malaysia use commodity from the apa ni logam apa lupa kata
Meter.
metal
Hmm.
from the from the heavy industries such as metal in the commodity market. So the asset must be certain and of real entity. It must satisfy all the asset requirements. Such asset of the bank is identified and must not be a ribawi item or used for any other purpose. And the true value of the asset is evaluated by an assessor or surveyor. Re-evaluation is carried out from time to time. And the asset that is used as the variable is labeled with a serial number. So in order to be valid, buy owner must undergo strict compliance process, which is governed by various laws, inclusive of the rules of owner as underlined by the Shafi'is, the requirements stipulated by SAC and the Securities Commission, SAT of Bank Negara Malaysia and SAC of the Securities Commission, the Islamic Bank Act 1983, and the Banking and Financial Institutions Act 1989. So the SAC of Bank Negara has endorsed the validity of several products which are INAH based. In 1997, on the 8th of July, Islamic bonds structured on INAH was allowed. And on 10th of April 2000 and 30th of January 2002, the Council has endorsed sell and buyback contracts. The sell and buyback application may be seen in the sample clause below. This is a sample clause. Under the concept of buy or owner, the bank shall first enter into an agreement with the customer to sell the property known as particulars of the lot of the bank's property assigned to the respective branches at an agreed selling price of certain ringgit, inclusive of a profit margin agreed upon on deferred payment term. And then later on, the bank will repurchase back the property from the customer at a purchase price of certain ringgit at a market value. So the purchase price shall then be disbursed into a designated account of the customer. This is the concept of buy all owner. Also in the controversial BBS clause, by
Taman Ajil.
Taman Ajil clause, which actually has a structure of buy all owner. Let's look at the BBA clause. Actually, BBA now is no longer used. It was, used previously at a certain point in time. So in the BBA's clause, the customer has applied to the bank for a financing facility, and the bank has approved the said application. And in accordance with the financing procedure of the bank, the customer agrees to sell it to the bank. And the bank, at request of customer, agrees to purchase from the customer the property for the purpose of immediately thereafter selling the property back to the customer upon deferred payment terms under the Sharia principles of Al-Bay' Bitaman Ajil. So in this clause, the concept of Bay' al-Ina is used together with the concept of Bay' Bitaman Ajil. But right now, Bay' Bitaman Ajil is no longer used and is no longer allowed by SAC. Now, most banks replace by Bitaman Ajil with Tawaru. So Bai'ul-Ina has been highly criticized by other countries. If you go to certain website and even certain WhatsApp group, they, the jurists outside of Malaysia, they criticize the practice of Bai'ul-Ina. So it includes Jeddah-based Islamic Fiqh Academy, who also criticized Bai'ul-Ina and the Islamic Banking Conference, the Sharia supervisory boards of several number of Islamic banks, such as Kuwait Finance House, Faisal Islamic Bank of Bahrain, and Darul Mal Al-Islami. The same resolution is also reached by ALFI. So all these institutions, including ALFI, the Sharia supervisory boards of banks outside of Malaysia, they criticize the use of Bai'ul-Ina as practiced in Malaysia. An effort was launched by Bank Negara Malaysia of organizing the regional Sharia scholars dialogue on Aina and Tawaruk, and the meeting was conducted in 2006 with the aim to harmonize and promote understanding among the Sharia scholars of the Islamic finance, particularly on finding the solution for Aina and Tawaruk. So based on that meeting, the council resolved that the permissibility of Aina and Tawaruk is still a matter of juristic disagreement among the Sharia scholars, backed by their own basis of justifications. So it's okay. Some people say it is permissible. Some jurists say it is not permissible. So this is hilaf, juristic disagreement. Number two, the council resolved that the basis relied upon in justifying the permissibility of tawaruk is similar to the basis on justifying by or ina. Therefore, both concepts shall be ruled similarly. So if by or ina is ruled permissible, then tawaruk should be ruled permissible. However, if by or ina is ruled as not permissible, then tawaruk should be ruled as not permissible. And number three, the council resolved that Bai'ul-Ina is still necessary in the context of local Islamic financial development. However, the market players are required to strengthen and to enhance the operational processes and documentation to comply with the features of Bai'ul-Ina as permitted. So this is based on the maslahah, because the council realized that Bai'ul-Ina is still needed in the context of Islamic finance for the the to achieve the maslahah, which is the 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 essence of maqasid sharia. And number four, the council resolved that since Bai'ul-Inah is still regarded as a matter of juristic disagreement among the Sharia scholars, it is more desirable that Islamic financial institutions limit its use in products which face difficulty in structuring them based on other consensually accepted contracts. So that's why the SSC of Bank Negara, after that meeting in 2009, has passed its resolution prohibiting the insertion of interconditionality or a condition or promise by the customer to purchase the property from the bank in the recital or any part of contract involved. Any practice otherwise will nullify the contract. So in 2009, Bank Negara prohibits the two stages of Bai'ul-Inah to be dependent on the other. For example, the purchaser cannot be asked to sell back, cannot be forced to sell back the commodity to the initial seller, and also the seller cannot be forced to buy back the commodity from the buyer. And SAC, Sharia Advisory Council of Bank Negara, also listed 5 conditions for the contract to be sahih or valid. The 5 conditions are: number 1, the two sale contracts must be clear and separated from one another. For example, the first contract where the seller sells, the first party sells the commodity at a higher price on deferred payment. And then the second contract, the second party sells back the commodity to the first party at market value or at a lower price for a cash. So the two contracts must be clear and must be separated from one another. Number 2, does not contain the condition to buy back in any part of the contract. Number 3, the period of executing the contract must differ. Number 4, the sequence of execution for the contracts is correctly done. And that means that the first sale contract must be executed before executing the second sale contract. And number 5, the transfer of ownership is affected. So there must be a clear transfer of ownership and the control over the property or qab as recognized under Sharia, as well as the current sale practice or uruf tijari exists. So the property must be in existence, must be Sharia compliant, and must also follow uruf tijari or the practice of the current sale. So those are the conditions as outlined by Bank Negara Malaysia, the Sharia Advisory Council in 2009. Any question? Ahmad, any question?
No, sir. Thank you so much.
No, if you don't have question, that means you understand everything.
I hope that.
Okay.
Doktor,
Yes.
Baik Inah ni dia kira salah satu chapter yang the big chapter lah, under Istinah, Tawaruk, and then another one by Al-Inah.
Ya, ya. Dia tiga chapter yang berbeza lah. Cumanya Ba'ul Inah dengan Tawaruk ni dia macam related. Sebab Ba'ul Inah dia melibatkan dua pihak. Pihak pertama menjual barang kepada pihak kedua dengan harga yang lebih tinggi berasaskan kepada kredit. Bayar ansuran kan. Kemudian pihak kedua menjual semula kepada pihak pertama the same commodity tapi dengan harga market value lah, at lower price untuk dapat cash. Cuma Tawaruk bezanya ialah dia melibatkan tiga pihak. Pihak pertama menjual komoditi dengan harga lebih tinggi on credit macam tadi jugalah. Kemudian pihak kedua bila dia dapat komoditi, dia jual komoditi kepada pihak yang ketiga at a lower price, at the market value for cash. So komoditi dalam Tawaruk dia tak berpatah balik kepada pihak pertama tapi kepada pihak yang ketiga.
So by Al-Inah only dua parti kan, doktor kan?
Ya, betul.
Okay.
Involves only two parties. Tawaruk involves three parties. And dalam Tawaruk, pihak ketiga tu dengan pihak pertama tu mesti dua pihak
sama
yang berbeza dalam Tawaruk lah. Dalam Tawaruk, untuk Tawaruk tu menjadi halal, pihak pertama dengan pihak ketiga mesti dua pihak yang berbeza.
Contoh dia macam yang rumah developer dengan bank dengan customer tu lah, tiga kan? Kalau Tawaruk kan?
Tawaruk selalu kita guna contoh macam komoditi lah. Okey, macam pihak pertama katalah bank kan. Pihak pertama kata bank. So bank ni dia menjual satu komoditi, katakan harga komoditi tu 250,000 kepada pihak kedua iaitu customer. Jadi customer membeli komoditi itu on deferred payment. Harga dia harga tinggi lah, 250,000. Kemudian customer tu bila dapat komoditi itu dia jual kepada pihak ketiga. Okey, pihak ketiga tu bukan bank lah. Dia jual balik kepada misalnya dia jual balik kepada commodity market dengan harga 200,000 dan commodity market bayar 200,000 on cash lah, in cash. Cuma dalam praktis bank bertindak sebagai wakil lah untuk menjual semula komoditi itu kepada commodity market.
Dia sama dengan ASB financing kan, doktor?
Apa dia?
Sama dengan ASB financing lah. Tawaruk tu. Dia
ASB financing macam mana dia buat nak kena kaji juga tu. Yang mungkin faham ASB financing dia buat macam mana?
Financing dia macam tu juga ada tiga pihak juga kot. Macam customer, bank dengan pihak yang ketiga. So, kita bayar secara deferment lah tiap bulan.
Okey. ASB financing boleh guna konsep Tawaruk? Boleh? Macam bank rakyat guna konsep tabaruk untuk personal financing.
Personal financing kan? Ada kan? Pakai
Ya,
tawaruk.
ya. Sekarang ni bank rakyat guna konsep tabaruk untuk buat personal financing.
Konsep dia sama je kan?
Konsep dia sama lah.
Baik.
Selalu komoditi tu dia pilih mana-mana metal lah daripada komoditi market. Kadang-kadang
Memang mau tak mau kena terikat dengan komoditi je.
sebab komoditi paling senang untuk jual dan beli. Dia boleh jual dengan beli on the spot. Dia tak semestinya komoditi tu tak semestinya logam kan. Tapi logam sebab boleh dijual dan dibeli dengan senang.
Lalu pihak ketiga ni kategori apa? Apa dia punya, kita panggil,
Macam personal financing kan. Pihak pertama bank, pihak kedua customer, pihak ketiga commodity market lah.
komoditi market kan?
Pihak ketiga commodity market lah.
Itu ada kawan tanya.
Ya.
Jawab loan ni ada pakai tawaruk lah. Jawab ya.
Tapi masih masih ramai orang petikai lah kan. Sebab yang orang petikai tu dia berlaku simultaneous transaction. Misalnya bank jual komoditi kepada customer 250,000 katakan ya. Dan customer bayar balik dalam masa 10 tahun kan. 250,000. Simultaneously masa tu juga customer minta bank melantik bank sebagai wakil untuk jual balik komoditi itu kepada komoditi market. Jadi disebabkan simultaneous transaction tu, itu yang sebahagian daripada ni ulama lah masih masih menganggap tawaruk itu sebagai tidak harus. Jadi tawaruk ni pun khilaf lah. Ada yang kata permissible, ada yang kata haram, ada yang kata tak sah. Jadi dia masih tak selesai lah, masih khilaf lah maknanya. Tapi di Malaysia memang kita masih guna lah tawaruk. Okey, kita tengok the meaning of tawaruk. Dr. Wahbah Az-Zuhaili viewed that tawaruk is derived from the root word tawarraqa. Tawarraqa means animals which eat leaves from the trees. And tawriq means silver coins. So there are two meanings. Tawarraqa means animals which eat leaves from the trees. And tawriq means silver coins. So tawriq means silver coins means someone who has plenty of silver coins. So most jurists claim that the word tawarruq comes from tawriq. Tawarruq comes from the word tawriq, which means silver coins. It's also mentioned in Surah Al-Kahfi, verse 19. This is a long verse from Surah Al-Kahfi. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. This is a long verse from Surah Al-Kahfi, but I will read only part of the verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. فابعثوا أحدكم بورقكم هذه إلى المدينة. فابعثوا أحدكم بورقكم هذه إلى المدينة. So send one of you with these silver coins. Biwariqikum. So ada perkataan wariqi situ. Biwariqikum. Kataannya wariqa. Wariqa here means silver coin. Fab'athu ahadakum biwariqikum hadhihi ilal madinah. Send one of you with the silver coins of yours to the town. Istilahan, tunggu sekejap. Salam. Nak pergi esok kan? Okay. Yang kena belum kan? Assalamualaikum.
Selamat dah.
Minta maaf ada gangguan sikit. Buat kelas di rumah macam tu kan. Jiran mai. Okay, let's continue. The technical definition of tawarruq. Tawarruq refers to a sale which involves two stages of sale. The first stage concerns buying a commodity in credit between the seller and buyer, the first party and the second party. Whilst in the second stage, the commodity is sold in cash by the buyer, the second party, to a third party. So that is tawarruq. So tawarruq is a term used exclusively by the Hanbalis. The Hanafis, Shafi'is, and Malikis, tawarruq is discussed as part of Ina, because the difference between Bai'ul Ina and tawarruq is just Bai'ul Ina involves two parties, while tawarruq involves three parties. So in the madhab of Hanafis, Shafi'is, and Malikis, tawarruq is considered as part of Ina. So the jurists, when describing Bai'ul Ina, have instinctively mentioned tawarruq as one type of Ina. Ibn Qayyim considers the buyer in Bai'ul Ina as a compelled person, as the case in tawarruq has classified compelled persons into three categories. The second party, according to Ibn Qayyim, is called compelled person. There are three categories of the compelled person. One, if he returns the commodity to the seller, then it is called Aina. If the second party sells back the commodity to the first party, then it is called Aina. If he sells the commodity to a third party, then it is called tawarruq. If he returns the commodity to someone who is involved in the transaction between the fourth person and the first seller, the intermediary is called muhallil al-riba, that is permitting riba. That is according to Ibn Qayyim. Ibn Qayyim further states that these three instances are carried out by those who practice riba, and the lesser between these instances is known as tawarruq. Therefore, Ibn Qayyim says it is essential to know the differences between Aina and tawarruq. What's the difference between Aina and tawarruq? The only main difference between Bai'ul Aina and tawarruq is that Aina involves two parties, whether between the same initial parties or different. So Aina involves two parties and Tawaruk involves three parties. And the subject matter or the commodity with prior arrangement shall not return to its original owner, that is Tawaruk. Taqi Osmani from the Hanbali's perspective, Taqi Usmani was the chief of Aufi. So Taqi Usmani from the Hanbali's perspective says the difference between Bai'ul Aina and Tawaruk is that in Bai'ul Aina, the commodity sold will eventually go back to the initial seller. Whilst in Tawaruk, the commodity will be sold to a third party, not the initial seller. However, there are similarities between Bai'ul Aina and Tawaruk. Firstly, the seller, the first party, will sell the commodity in deferment at a higher price than the value of the market in Bai'ul Aina and Tawaruk. Secondly, the common aim is to obtain cash and not to obtain the commodity itself. And thirdly, both contracts, Bai'ul Aina and Tawaruk, are built based on hila or legal trick to avoid riba. So, so let's look at the legality of Tawaruk. So, because there are similarities between Tawaruk and Aina, the evidence quoted for the legality of Aina are also extended to Tawaruk. So for those who so there are those who permits Aina and those who do not permit Aina. Okay, wait. Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
Okay. Sorry about the interruption. So let's discuss the permissibility of Tawaruk. Actually, there are three types of Tawaruk. And the first type is called uh, classical Tawaruk. Classical Tawaruk is actually permissible according to the International Council of Islamic Fiqh Academy. In 2009, the Council, the International Council of Islamic Fiqh Academy, classifies Tawaruk into three types of Tawaruk. The first type is permissible. The first type is called technical Tawaruk. What is classical Tawaruk? According to jurists, Tawaruk can be defined as a person, mustawrik, who buys merchandise at a deferred price in order to sell it in cash at a lower price. Usually, he sells the merchandise to a third party with the aim to obtain cash. This is the classical tawarruk, which is permissible, provided it complies with the Sharia requirements on sale or buy. So, for example, there are three parties. The first party sells the commodity to the second party at a higher price on credit or on deferred payment. And once the akad is completed, the second party takes the commodity and sells the commodity to a third party for a price lower than the deferred payment price in order to obtain a cash. So if it involves three parties, then this is called classical tawarruk, which is permissible, provided that it complies with the Sharia requirements on sale, provided that all the arkanul akad, the pillars of akad, is fulfilled and it is Sharia compliant. The second type is not permissible, and it is called organized tawarruk. What is organized tawarruk? When a person, mustawrik, buys a merchandise from a local or international market on deferred price basis, the financier arranges the sale agreement either himself or through his agent. Simultaneously, the mustawrik and the financier execute the transactions, usually at a lower spot price. According to the, the academy, the classical tawarruk is not permissible. For example, a bank sells a commodity. A bank is the first party, sells a commodity on a deferred payment to second party customer for 250,000 ringgit. And then the customer appoints the bank simultaneously sells back the commodity for 200,000 ringgit in order to get the cash. So the second party and the first party, which is the bank, execute the transactions simultaneously. So this is called the organized tawarruk as practiced by financial institutions in Malaysia. And the third tawarruk is called the reverse tawarruk, similar to organized tawarruk, but in this case, the mustawrik is a financial institution and it acts as a client. Okay, so according to the council, the second and third species of tawarruk, the classical, the council ruled that the second and third species of tawarruk, that is the organized tawarruk and the reverse tawarruk, is not permissible. Why? Because of the simultaneous transactions that occur between the financier and the mustawrik, either done explicitly or implicitly or based on common practice, as a favor or in exchange for a financial obligation. Such is considered a deception, that is in order to get an additional quick cash from the contracts, hence amounting to riba. This is a resolution by the Council in 2009. Can you see the slide that I'm sharing? Can you see the slide?
Can.
Yes, sudah.
So the International Council of Islamic Fiqh Academy in 2009. Okay, any questions so far? You don't have question? So why is it that certain banks in Malaysia still use the organized tawarruk when the International Council of Islamic Fiqh Academy in 2009 already ruled that it is not permissible? Why? You don't have question? I ask you the question. Anybody wants to try to answer?
It's based on the perspective maqasid syariah, especially for maslahat.
Okay, that's a good answer. So the main reason is the bank follows the SAC of Bank Negara Malaysia. Bank or financial institutions in Malaysia do not have to follow the Islamic Fiqh Academy. Okay, this is the resolution by the International Council of Islamic Fiqh Academy. However, banks in Malaysia, they follow SAC, Syariah Advisory Council of Bank Negara Malaysia. If you read the Syariah standard on tawarruk and follow the operational requirements, then tawarruk can be offered by Islamic financial institutions. So to know more about how to use tawarruk, how we can fulfill the Sharia requirement, and how the bank can fulfill the operational requirement, you need to read the Sharia standard on tawarruk. Okay? Please read the Sharia standard on tawarruk, because I don't have time to go through. Okay? Di Malaysia boleh sebab kita ikut SAC Bank Negara Malaysia. Tapi kita kena ikut syariah standard lah. Keperluan dari segi syariah dan keperluan dari segi operasi. Syariah requirement and operational requirement. Ahmad, any question? Any question on Bai'ul Ainah and Tawarruk?
No, sir. Thank you.
So in conclusion, the jurists have identified a lot. The jurists have identified a lot in the allowance to the practice of Ainah. In Malaysia, Bai'ul Ainah is extensively used in offering various products of Islamic finance. With all the arguments against Ainah, one may say that the time has come for Islamic banking practices to move away from Bai'ul Ainah. So because there are differences of opinions among the jurists regarding the permissibility of Bai'ul Ainah, and because of some problems related to Bai'ul Ainah, so banks need to move away from Bai'ul Ainah, and I think a lot of banks have no longer used Bai'ul Ainah. Even if Ainah was to continue for a certain period of time, we need to ensure that all the conditions of Ainah as outlined in Shafi'i school are well observed. I would like to add that in the practice of Islamic banking and finance, we are not tied to madhab Shafi'i. The resolutions made by Sharia Advisory Council of Bank Negara Malaysia take into account all the four madhabs and use the opinions of madhab which brings the most maslahah to the ummah. That's why even if you know, so that's why even if certain madhab permits, even if certain madhab do not permit, other madhab permit the use of certain concepts. SSC takes into account all the madhab, and SSC does some sort of tarjih. You know, tarjih means to take the opinions which are the best in terms of bringing the most maslahah to the ummah. So we don't follow only one madhab in the context of Islamic banking and finance. In Malaysia, in ibadah, in the context of specific ibadah, salat, saum, fasting, we follow madhab Shafi'i, right? However, in the context of Islamic financial institutions in Malaysia, we are not tied with any madhab. We look at the opinions of all madhab and we use the opinions which bring the most benefits to the ummah.
Doktor,
Yes.
ada tak any person argue or asking to doktor lah, why in our normal routine we follow Syafi'i, but in Islamic finance we have to follow the other mazhab?
Why? Mukri. So,
Ya.
so dalam dari segi fiqh, kita kena ikut mazhab tertentu. Because tukar-tukar mazhab dalam bidang fiqh sebenarnya dilarang dari segi fiqh, kan?
Ya.
Kita kena stick kepada satu-satu mazhab. Hujah dia panjang lah. Sebab kita sendiri tidak alim, kita sendiri macam orang awam, kita ikut satu-satu mazhab. Melainkan kita ni alim dan kita boleh berhujah kenapa kita buat ibadat seperti apa ni yang kita buat lah. Kalau kita nak berbeza kan, kita mestilah sampai satu tahap alim yang kita boleh berhujah lah. Kalau orang tu dia alim, dia misalnya hafal Quran, dia hafal berapa ribu hadis, dia boleh berhujah, dia tak perlulah ikut mazhab. Tapi bagi orang kebanyakan macam kita ni yang baca Quran pun mangkuk kan. Jadi lebih baiklah kita ikut mazhab.
Okay.
Supaya ada panduan. Dan dalam kaedah fiqh, kita tak boleh suka-suka tukar mazhab. Kalau kita nak guna satu mazhab tu je. Untuk ibadat khusus. Okey. Yang tu jawab separuh pada soalan tu kan.
Okay.
Untuk Islamic finance pula, Sebab dia bukan ibadat khusus. Dia jadi dia masuk dalam fiqhul muamalat. Tadi fiqhul ibadat. Dia sebab fiqhul muamalat. Jadi dalam fiqhul muamalat, kita tak perlu terikut kepada mana-mana mazhab. Kenapa? Kerana bagi saya lah hujahnya ialah kita nak ambil pendapat-pendapat yang paling banyak membawa maslahah ataupun kebaikan kepada umat secara keseluruhan. Kalau kita ambil satu mazhab saja, kita akan terikat dan banyak bahasa mudahnya banyak produk,
Halangan lah.
banyak halangan lah, banyak benda kita tak boleh buat kan, kalau terlampau terikat. Dan ini merugikan kita lah dari segi ekonomi kan, dari segi muamalat tu. Jadi hujah dia bagi saya lah untuk membawa paling banyak maslahah lah dalam bidang fiqhul muamalat, yang menyebabkan SAC tu, kita punya the highest authority di Malaysia tu, SAC of Bank Negara Malaysia, menggunakan semua mazhab. Hujah dia supaya kita boleh ambil pendapat-pendapat yang praktikal lah, pendapat-pendapat yang boleh kita guna dalam praktikal. Sebab kalau kita terikat dengan mazhab, banyak halangan dan dia jadi tak praktikal. Contoh kita nak ikut mazhab Hanafi. Okay, mazhab Syafi'i. Katalah kita nak ikut mazhab Syafi'i. Contohlah, katakan kita nak ikut mazhab Syafi'i dalam jual beli. Mazhab Syafi'i dan jual beli, barang tu mesti ada, barang tu mesti wujud, dan pertukaran mesti by hand, yadun biyadin,
Bayar tu.
by hand. Kalau kita nak ikut itu, maknanya kita sangat terikat lah kan. Apa ni online business tak boleh, banyak benda yang tak boleh lah. Kan, jadi kita tak terikat dengan mazhab Syafi'i lah. Sebab kita kalau terikat tu, kita kata banyak halangan lah. Dan
macam
tak praktikal, tak praktikal lah.
Betul. Kalau tidak semua benda kena beli cash lah, doktor. Tak boleh finance lah. Kena nampak.
Macam kita nak beli online
transaction.
Nak beli di mesin tak boleh ya. Sebab buyer dengan seller tak jumpa.
Betul.
Nak beli online tak boleh, buyer dengan seller tak nak jumpa. Kita tak tahu pun kita beli barang benda siapa. Online lah. Jadi macam tak praktikal lah, tak praktikal.
Kita tak mau nampak Islam ni rigid lah.
Memudahkan lah.
Ya.
Simplify.
Sebab dalam
betul. Kita tak mau nampak Islam ni terlampau rigid kan.
Sebab Islam dengan mazhab, Islam lagi luas lagi.
Ya, betul. Islam dengan mazhab, Islam lagi luas. Dalam bidang fiqh muamalat. Tapi kita masih, orang kata, dalam Islamic banking kita masih ada pihak yang kita ikut lah, iaitu SAC. Bukanlah kita boleh buat pandai-pandai juga kan.
Yalah.
Macam bank tu, dia kena ikut lah segala guideline yang dikeluarkan oleh SAC. Ada siapa-siapa nak tambah lagi? Soalan lain? Ahmad, any question?
No, sir, I don't have any question.
You want to add something?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, Mukri, nak tambah apa-apa?
InsyaAllah. Ada insyaAllah.
Cik Akmal,
Okay, doktor.
ada soalan lagi boleh tanya? The more questions, the better.
Okay, doktor. Tadi doktor dah jawab lah.
Okay. So, saya stop recording lah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.